I've been hauling freight up north for about 12 years now, mostly running the lumber routes between Duluth and the Canadian border. It's a different kind of world up there, especially in the winter months when the snow packs down into ice. I actually prefer the solitude because it lets me set my own pace, and I don't have to deal with the aggressive city traffic you get down in Minneapolis or Chicago. This happened 2 years ago, late in October. The snow hadn't really started sticking yet, but the ground was frozen hard. I was on a return leg, deadheading back to the depot, which means I was pulling an empty trailer. The truck handles differently when it's empty. It bounces a lot more and the wind can push you around, so you have to be a little more alert. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was on a stretch of 2-lane blacktop that cut through the Superior National Forest. I hadn't seen another set of headlights for at least an hour. I was moving at a good clip, probably 60 miles an hour, because I knew the road was dry and I wanted to get home before sunrise. I came around a shallow bend, and my lights swept across the road ahead, where something large was lying right across the center line. It looked like a massive buck. In this part of the country, hitting a moose or a deer is a legitimate danger. They can total your rig or send you into the ditch if you try to swerve. I didn't have time to stop, so I gripped the steering wheel tight and braced for impact, trying to aim for the center of the bumper. The truck hit the object with a sickening heavy thud. It wasn't the wet crunch you usually hear with an animal. It was a solid, jarring impact that shook the entire cab. I pulled the rig onto the narrow gravel shoulder and popped the air brakes. I needed to check what I hit, because I felt it drag under the axles, and I had to make sure it wasn't caught up in the brake lines or wedged in the suspension. Plus, if it was a deer, I needed to drag it off the road so the next driver didn't hit it and wreck their car. I walked back along the side of the trailer, shining my light on the asphalt. I could see the skid marks where I had braked, and about 50 yards back, I saw the dark shape lying in the middle of the road. I walked right up to it and kicked it with my boot. It didn't feel like flesh and bone. It felt hard and gritty. I bent down and shined the light directly on it. It wasn't an animal. It was a large burlap grain sack, the kind they use for feed or sandbags. It had been spray painted with dark brown and red paint to look like fur and blood from a distance. I poked it with my gloved hand, and it was packed solid with wet sand and jagged river rocks. My stomach turned over. This wasn't accidental. Someone had dragged this heavy sack into the middle of the road and positioned it exactly where a driver would see it, so they would stop and get out. I stood up straight, sweeping my flashlight beam across the tree line, but the woods were dead silent. Then, I heard a metal banging sound from my truck. I spun around and shined the light at my rig. The sound came from the back of the trailer. The right side door was swinging open. I had walked right past the back of the truck a minute ago, and it was closed. Now, it was wide open. Someone had come out of the woods near where I parked and unlatched it while I was staring at the bag in the road. I started running back toward the cab. As I got closer, my flashlight beam caught 2 guys coming out of the ditch. They were dressed in dark, heavy coats. They were moving toward the open trailer door. One of them saw me running and shouted something to the other guy, and they both turned and started walking fast toward the front of the truck to cut me off. I ran as hard as I could. I scrambled up the steps and threw the door open just as one of the guys reached the front fender. He had something metal in his hand, but I didn't wait to see what it was. I slammed the door and locked it. I released the parking brake and stomped on the gas pedal. I swerved the truck hard to the left, getting onto the pavement. I watched the side mirrors and saw the 2 figures standing in the middle of the road watching me go. The rear trailer door was still unlatched and banging against the side of the trailer. I drove like that for 30 miles until I reached the first town with a lit-up gas station. I pulled in and called the state troopers immediately. When they went back to the scene, they found the sandbag still in the road, but the men were gone. They found footprints in the snow in the ditch where they had been waiting. I've been a truck driver for a while now, and most of my work is long runs at night. It's tiring, but I'm used to it. I've slept in my cab in all kinds of places, from proper truck stops to the side of the highway when there's nowhere else to go. I've had some sketchy moments here and there, but one night made me change how I look at anyone who knocks on my door after dark. This was on a busy route, but it was late. I'd already tried 2 different truck stops and a rest area, and every single one was packed. Trucks were crammed into every marked spot, lined up on the ramps, even parked on the shoulders near the exits. I was getting close to the end of my hours, and I was too tired to keep hunting for a perfect place to sleep. Eventually, I gave in and pulled onto a long, straight stretch of shoulder a little past an exit. I'd seen other trucks parked there before on other nights, so it didn't feel completely crazy, but this time, I was the only one there. I set the brakes, did a quick look around, then locked both doors and closed the curtains. It was quiet enough that I could hear the occasional car go by, but not much else. I set my alarm to wake me up in a couple of hours, lay down in the sleeper, and I was out pretty fast. I don't know how long I was asleep when the knocking started. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again. Hard knocks on the driver's door, right by my head. The whole cab shook a little with each hit. My first thought was that it was a cop or highway patrol telling me I couldn't park there. That happens sometimes. So I was just annoyed and groggy. I slid out of the bunk and pulled the curtain back just a bit to look. I could see light flashing on the side of my trailer and the road. When I leaned closer, I saw a small car pulled up behind my truck with its hazard lights on. The hood was up. A man in a light jacket was standing down by my door, looking up at the cab. In the car, I could see someone sitting in the passenger seat and a small shape in the back seat that looked like a kid. The man called up, "Sir, please." We broke down. "My wife and kids are in the car. Can you help us?" His voice sounded shaky, like he was about to lose it. Instead of opening the door, I cracked the window a bit. I've always had a rule about that. I asked him what was going on. He said the car died. They didn't know what was wrong with it, and they didn't have a signal to call anyone. He asked if I could give him a jump or let his wife and kids sit in the truck while he walked to get gas. While he was talking, I glanced back toward the car again. The wife was looking straight ahead, not at us, and I noticed a faint glow in her hands, like the light from a phone screen. If they didn't have service when and his phone was dead, I didn't understand why she was holding a lit phone. That was the first thing that made me feel off. I asked where they were coming from and where they were headed. He hesitated just long enough to notice, then gave a town name in one direction and a destination in the other that didn't really line up with the highway we were actually on. It sounded like he just grabbed 2 names he knew. As he kept talking, I checked my passenger side mirror. In the reflection, I caught a quick bit of movement down by the back of my trailer. It looked like someone ducking or moving low near my rear doors, just out of the direct light from the hazard flashers. Then they were out of sight again. The man at my door asked me again to open up. He stepped a little closer to the cab. The way he kept trying to get me to unlock the door, instead of just asking me to call for help, was starting to feel wrong. At that point, my gut feeling finally caught up with me. I told him I was going to call Highway Patrol right then, and that they'd send someone out to help them and keep them safe. I held my phone up, so he could see I meant it. His whole tone changed. He stepped back from the door and said, No, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out." While the call was ringing, I kept my eyes on the mirrors instead of him. In the passenger mirror, I saw 2 figures now at the back corner of my trailer, moving quickly toward the car. They hadn't come up to the cab even once. They went straight from my trailer to the car, staying low in the dark. Before the dispatcher even finished her first sentence, the hazard lights on the car turned off. Doors slammed. The car pulled away from behind my trailer and went back onto the highway, like there was nothing wrong with it at all. It merged and disappeared down the road. I stayed on the line and told the dispatcher exactly what had just happened. They said they'd send a unit to check the area and told me to move to a safer, more populated place to sleep if I could. Later that night, when I finally made it to a real truck stop, I walked around my rig with a flashlight. The rear doors were still closed, but there were fresh scuff marks and dirty shoe prints on the bumper, near the latch that hadn't been there earlier in my shift. It was clear someone had been working back there, probably trying to get into my trailer, or seeing if they could get me to step down so they could do something worse. A few weeks after that, I heard a couple of other drivers talking at a counter about families breaking down on that same stretch, always at night, always waving truckers down or knocking on doors. Since that night, I still try to help people when I can, but if anyone knocks on my door on a dark shoulder with a perfect little story about a stranded family, I don't open up. I call it in and keep the doors locked. I've been a truck driver since my mid-20s, and I've done more night driving than I can even remember. I've had a few creepy moments out there, but this one still bugs me every time I see flashing lights on an empty highway. This was a couple of years ago, on a long overnight run on a stretch of interstate I knew pretty well. It was one of those quiet, clear nights. I was feeling all right, just letting the miles go by. After a while, I noticed a pair of headlights way back behind me. They slowly got closer, which is normal, but when they reached me, they didn't pass. They just sat back there behind my trailer, not tailgating but hanging at that weird distance where you always see them in your mirror. Then I saw the red and blue lights start flashing. It looked like the lights were coming from inside the car, not from a light bar on the roof. Still, I just figured it was some kind of unmarked unit. Trucks get stopped for all kinds of reasons, even when you don't think you did anything wrong. So I did what you're supposed to do. I put on my signal, eased off the speed, and started looking for a safe spot. There weren't any ramps or rest areas right there, just a decent shoulder. So I rolled to a stop on the right side. The car followed and stopped on the shoulder a little ways behind my trailer. Sitting there, I had my hands on the wheel, watching the mirror. The first thing that bothered me was the car itself. It looked like a regular dark sedan. In my mirror, I couldn't see any clear markings, no obvious logos on the doors, no big police lettering, just the flashing lights in the window. Nothing happened for a few seconds. The car just sat there with the lights going. It took longer than I expected for the driver to get out, long enough that I started feeling a little uneasy. Eventually, the door opened, and a man got out and started walking up along the shoulder toward my cab. Even from up in my seat, he looked off to me. He was in dark clothing, maybe a jacket or vest, but I didn't see any reflective strips or patches like most officers wear at night. I didn't see a proper hat. Whatever was on his chest wasn't shining, like a normal badge. He came up on my side and gestured for me to roll the window down. I lowered it a bit, not all the way, just enough so we could talk. He went straight into asking for my license, registration, and logbook. Up close, more little details jumped out. The thing on his chest looked more like a generic metal emblem than any state badge I'd seen. His belt didn't look like a full-duty belt either, more like a regular belt with a holster and a couple of random pouches on it. He didn't really look around the truck. He mostly kept looking at me and occasionally glancing back at his car. Then he started slipping in questions that had nothing to do with a normal roadside check. He asked if I was alone or if I had someone sleeping in the back. He asked how far I was going that night and where I planned to stop and if I had any cash with me in the cab. The way he said it was casual, almost like small talk, but the content of it was wrong. I've never had an officer ask about my cash situation on the side of the road. By then, every instinct I had was telling me something wasn't right. I was parked on a dark stretch of highway, no other vehicles around, with a guy next to my door who didn't feel like a cop, but who had me sitting there like it was a legitimate stop. I kept my voice calm and told him I had a dash cam running and that my company liked us to verify night stops. I said I was going to call emergency services to confirm the stop before handing anything over. I said it like it was normal procedure. I picked up my phone right there in front of him and dialed 911. I put it on speaker so both of us could hear. While it rang, I glanced at him. His expression changed just slightly, like he wasn't expecting me to make that call. When the dispatcher answered, I explained that I was a truck driver, pulled over on whatever interstate it was, by what looked like an unmarked car. I said I wanted to make sure it was an actual officer. I made sure to say the location clearly, loud enough for him to hear. The dispatcher asked me to describe the vehicle, and if the officer had identified himself properly. As I was answering, the man next to my door suddenly backed off. He said something, like there might have been a mix-up, and that I was fine to go. The tone was different now, no more pressure for documents, no explanation of a violation. He turned and headed back to his car. The lights went off before he even got inside. A few seconds later, he pulled out ahead of me and drove off down the highway, instead of waiting for me to merge back in behind him. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, watching the taillights disappear. She checked and then told me there were no units listed as doing stops in that area at that time. She suggested I drive to the next well-lit, busy place and park there, and to report the incident when I could. I did exactly that. I eased back onto the highway, drove straight to the next big truck stop I knew of, and parked under the lights with other rigs around me. Once I was sitting there with people nearby and cameras on the lot, the whole thing hit me a little harder. Later I filed a report and gave what details I remembered about the car and the guy, but I never heard anything else about it. I don't know if they ever found him, or if he tried it again on somebody else. All I know is that for me, after that night, getting lit up by an unmarked car on an empty stretch doesn't just mean I must have done something wrong anymore. It means I'm suddenly wondering, who's really sitting behind those lights? This happened about 3 years ago. I've been driving routes through the Rockies for almost 20 years now, and you get used to the snow pretty fast, or you just don't last in this line of work. Usually, I try to beat the storms, but this time I was on a tight deadline getting a load to Salt Lake, so I decided to push through. By the time I got near the summit, the snow was coming down heavy, and the chain law lights were flashing. I pulled into the chain-up area, which is just a widened strip of pavement off the highway. It was around 2 a.m. There was only one other truck in the lot, parked way down at the end. It was a livestock hauler. I pulled my rig in directly behind him, maybe 20 feet back. It's a common trick we do. Parking close to another trailer helps block the wind so the snow isn't hitting you sideways while you work. I grabbed my chains and hopped out. It was bitter cold. I went to the passenger side drives first. This put the entire body of my truck between me and the cattle hauler, which blocked the wind, but also meant I was hidden from anyone looking in their rearview mirror. I laid the chains out and crawled underneath the fender. You have to lay on your stomach in the slush to reach the inside hook behind the tire. It's a miserable spot to be in, dark and cramped, with just the sound of the wind howling under the chassis. I was wrestling with the cam lock when I heard a door slam on the truck in front of me. I paused, mostly just to make sure they weren't backing up toward me. From my spot under the axle, I could see through the gap between my front tires. I saw a pair of boots hit the ground near the cattle truck. They were cowboy boots. Then another pair of shoes stepped into the light, canvas sneakers that had no business being out in this weather. They were standing close to the back of the cattle truck. I couldn't hear the words over the wind, but the tone was angry. I just wanted them to hurry up so I could finish my job. The cowboy boots stepped forward suddenly. The sneakers slipped on the ice, and I heard a sharp crack. It sounded like a piece of wood snapping. The person in the sneakers dropped into the snow and didn't get up. I stopped breathing. I watched the cowboy boots stand there for a moment. Then he bent down and grabbed the body by the jacket. He dragged him toward the loading ramp of the livestock trailer. I heard the metal gate rattle open and the heavy sound of something being dumped inside. I realized then that if he walked around the back of his truck, he would see my rig parked right there. I pressed myself as flat as I could into the mud behind my tire. I heard footsteps crunching in the snow. He walked back toward my truck. I watched the cowboy boots stop near my front bumper. He was standing right there, looking at my cab. But because I had parked behind him for the windbreak, my headlights were off, and I had left my privacy curtains pulled shut from when I took a nap earlier. To him, the truck probably looked dark and empty, like the driver was asleep in the bunk. He didn't know I was lying in the slush 5 feet away from him. He stood there for a minute, probably deciding if he should check the door. Finally, he turned around and ran back to his cab. I heard the cattle truck engine roar as he peeled out of the lot. I didn't even finish latching the chains. I threw the loose iron into the side box and drove to the weigh station. I told the officer there was a body in a cattle hauler heading west. They caught him near the Utah border. It turned out they were co-drivers who got into a fight over the logbook hours. I still drive that route, and I'll take the wind over being hidden like that again.